hopefully onto our training site if the recording works out. Right, so we'll kick off the webinar. This is about the Weather Generator version 2. A lot of you may know that we had an original weather generator, and some amendments were made to that weather generator to create a new version. This is based on some of the limitations that we knew about the old weather generator, or the original weather generator. So I've already said that. Please note we're recording this session. If anybody objects, please type it in the chat box and we'll start recording. So what the weather generator is for people who might not know, it's a statistical tool that's used to downscale the 25-kilometer probabilistic projections. So it downscales them to plausible daily and hourly series of future climates. What it isn't is a tool that generates weather. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do weather forecasts. You can't look at a year in the future and tell what the weather's going to be like. I wish it would, because I'd love to know what the weather's going to be like on my rainy day, but I can't do that. So all it is doing is using the probabilistic projections to produce a plausible range of statistical future daily climate. So you shouldn't put too much emphasis on the accuracy of this data. It's really just to give you a statistical look into the future and look at what might be a statistical daily future climate. So why there's a new version of the weather generator? Well, we knew at launch that there were some limitations of the original weather generator. As with all science, things improve with time. And as our knowledge has increased and the weather generator team has been able to make improvements, we want to make those improvements visible to you. The nice thing about UKCP09 is it mostly is available online, so these kind of amendments are possible. And it's much better to do it like that, in our view, than to have snapshots of climate projections produced every 5 years. So this way you keep kept up to date with the latest science. So we've produced this, well, the weather generator team has produced the second version of the weather generator that addresses some of the known issues we had with the first version. So the new version is called version 2, and it improves some of the aspects of the weather generator that my colleague Sophie Millen is going to take you through. This was released on the 11th of February, and it has replaced the original weather generator on the user interface. So when you run a weather generator job now, you'll be using the new version 2 weather generator. Importantly, you can still access the old jobs in the jobs page. If you ran a job with the old weather generator, they'll still be stored in your jobs page. And if you wanted to still run jobs that you didn't run with the original weather generator, you can ask for those to be run through the help desk. So you can submit a query to the help desk, and those will be run for you, and we will send them back to you. So there is still opportunity to use the original weather generator if you want to. And also there's a set of guidance that we've written for the updated weather generator, and it's available from that link, which is very long, but if you know the UKCP09 projection site, it's really just that section that you need to know, 1206/500. If you stick that number onto the end, you'll get to the guidance pages on the second weather generator. So I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Sophie now, who's going to take you through some of the changes. And as I said, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. So anything you don't understand, we can take questions from you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking you through what has been changed with the weather generator and looking at the 4 key updates that have been implemented. So to provide you with as comprehensive understanding as possible, I'll talk you through the limitations in the original weather generator, looking at why it was necessary to make each of the updates. I'll then explain what was done to address each issue, and we'll take some questions at the end, as Anna said. So what has changed? Well, the new weather generator has been called version 2.0, and this is so you can add version number 1 or 2 to your work so others can replicate the method in the future. I will refer to the previous version as the original, or the UKCP09 Weather Generator, and the new version as version 2.0. So there have been 4 major amendments to the weather generator, which include changes to the rainfall and temperature extremes, an improvement in the number of sunshine hours in a day, and changes to the baselines for sunshine and vapor pressure. After the launch of UKCP09, it was discovered that the weather generator was underestimating hourly extreme rainfall. The urban drainage modelers who used the hourly data found that it was regularly underestimating the extremes when they looked at anything above a 5-year return period. This was because a simplified rainfall model had been used to make it as robust as possible. To improve the performance of the rainfall extremes, the weather generator team trialled a number of different and more complex distributions before selecting a gamma distribution. The series was analysed at a range of return periods and durations and validated against depth taken from the flood estimation handbook. The results are found to be more consistent than the previous method, which used an exponential distribution. So these graphs show the comparisons between the weather generator rainfall estimate and the flood estimation handbook depth duration frequency model estimate. The graph on the left is the daily resolution, and on the right is the hourly resolution. The weather generator team has chosen a site in North East England to illustrate these results. As you can see here, there was previously an underestimation of up to 50%. Sorry, hang on. There we are. Of up to 50% found in the 30-year return period. Now these graphs show the estimates are within the 90% confidence limit, which is a vast improvement. So you will also see that the weather generator performs better at daily on the left than at hourly on the graph on the right. And there was a very good fit to the flood estimation handbook model with the daily. However, for a number of reasons, caution should still be taken when using the hourly data. The original weather generator underestimated daily maximum and hourly extreme temperatures. This has been improved in 2 ways. The first is the addition of a dry spell transition, and the second is the use of a different temperature distribution. The next 2 slides will explain this in a bit more detail. The UKCP09 weather generator had 4 different 2-day sequences: dry today, dry yesterday, wet today, wet yesterday, dry today, wet yesterday, and wet today, dry yesterday. However, it didn't simulate the build-up of temperature during longer dry spells. So, for example, if a 2-day dry spell fell between 2 wet days, it would show the same results as if it were part of a longer dry spell. Because of this, the UKCP09 weather generator tended to underestimate the daily maximum temperature values during successive dry days. So this scenario in real life would tend to result in maximum temperatures building up each day with minimal overnight cooling in between. The weather generator team therefore added a 5th sequence of days: dry today, dry yesterday, dry the day before, which improves the performance for maximum temperatures and heat wave duration. Sorry, technical issues. Right. So the UKCP09 weather generator assumes a normal distribution for the baseline temperature of 1961 to 1990. However, temperature extremes can sometimes cause the distribution to skew, so the weather generator team have applied a calculation to the data, or a power transform. So they have validated the results using observed data, which has shown that the problem in the original weather generator has been alleviated. Moving on to sunshine hours, the original weather generator estimated daily sunshine producing values from the moment the sun rose above the horizon. And this overestimated effective sunshine because observational equipment does not begin recording until the sun is higher in the sky. So to deal with this, modifications were made to include a more realistic and slightly shorter day length. Version 2 now more accurately reflects how sunshine has been measured in the observation. Last year, users noted that outputs from the weather generator showed inconsistent changes in future sunshine hours when it was compared to changes in future cloud cover. It was also discovered that there was a related issue with vapor pressure, although the effects here were smaller. It's important to note that these issues are not to do with the probabilistic data or the original weather generator. They are due to the choice of the observed baseline climatology used to make the change factors. So how has it changed? Well, simply put, the weather generator team has set up a new observed baseline. The baselines were originally calculated from observed data, and now they have been derived using calculations. In more detail, most of the variables required in the change factors are available in the projections. However, sunshine and vapor pressure are two variables that are not part of the basic variables. They therefore had to be calculated from variables that are available, such as cloud, relative humidity, and temperature. So for sunshine, the calculation of 1 minus cloud has been used, which remains constant for the baseline of future climate. For vapor pressure, observational relative humidity and temperature have been used. These amendments now show more realistic changes. I'll now pass you over to Anna to explain the implications of these changes. Thank you.
Right, so if you've used the original weather generator, I keep calling it the old weather generator, but it's the original weather generator. If you've used that and you've done an analysis of extremes, it is recommended that you rerun your analysis with this version 2, because most of the changes affect the extremes within the weather generator. Obviously, sunshine and vapor pressure have changed, so if those are variables you're looking at, then you'll need to rerun your weather generator runs. But importantly, the average statistics and properties of the weather generator from the original to the second version shouldn't have changed very much. So if it's just looking at averages that you're looking at or you're interested in, you won't need to rerun the weather generator with the second version. But we do suggest you label your output in any report that you're doing as version 1 or version 2 of the weather generator, so people know what you've used. When you run a weather generator run now, you'll get a set of outputs, and in the meta file, there will be a note to say that this is version 2. So if you wanted to check, you can check that. And in all your old jobs, you can go back and check whether you've got a version 1 or version 2. The version 1 won't have anything in the metadata file, but the version 2 should have, this is version 2 of the weather generator written there. So I'm going to run through a couple of questions, well, more than a couple actually, about six questions that were submitted before this webinar started. I'm going to unmute a couple of the weather generator team. I'd like to introduce you to Chris Kilsby from Newcastle and Phil Jones from UEA, there he is, from the University of Anglia. And I'm just going to have a quick check and see if Colin Harton is on, who's also from the University of Anglia. Yes, there he is. I'm going to unmute him as well. So we've got 3 unmutes. And they're there and available to answer your questions. I'm also going to unmute Roger Street, because I'm sure he'll have something to say. There he is. So we're going to run through a couple of questions, and I'll ask Phil and Chris and Colin to please, if you have some input on these, they would be really useful. So the first question is, could you provide detailed information about the change of hourly temperature extremes? Do hourly dry bulb temperatures distribute in wider range? Any impact on median value of hourly temperature distribution? I think this section was done by Phil and Colin. Do you have anything to say on that?
Colin's written down some answers for those, so if you go over to Colin, he can sort of go through them.
Okay. Can everybody hear Phil speaking? Can you just put a tick next to your name so you can hear? Okay, excellent. Colin, are you able to answer that question?
Yes, I'm just trying to recall what it was we said. Well, first of all, just to clarify how it works, the hourly temperatures are actually disaggregated from the daily. So the improvements made to the daily distributions will be sort of fed through into the hourly. I have made some other tweaks in how the disaggregation works. So you should see some changes in the early extremes, which are reflected in some plots which I believe are distributed. The medium value should stay pretty much similar. I assume you mean average or median rather than medium.
Okay. All right. Phil, would you like to add anything to that?
Not at the moment, unless there's any more sort of follow-up questions to that.
If there's any follow-up questions to that, would you like to just raise your hand, which is just the button above the chat box where you can raise your hand, and I'll just have a quick check if anybody's got any follow-up questions. Right, no one seems to have any follow-up questions on that. Okay, so we move on to the second question. We calculated the direct normal beam solar radiation from Weather Generator 1's direct horizontal solar radiation data and direct normal solar radiation data were very high at sunrise and sunset time. Is there any change with reference to that? Now, I think there is, but Phil, do you want to talk about that, or Colin?
Colin again.
Okay, Colin?
Yeah, well, first of all, there was a bit of a bug where occasionally you would get too much sunshine after sunset, in fact. I rectified that, so the effect on sunshine would feed through to radiation to some extent, so that should improve things. And I also did quite a lot of work in the way that the hourly radiation is disaggregated from the daily and improve the shape of the distribution. So you shouldn't see so much at the sunrise and sunset times. So hopefully it'll be more accurate now.
Okay.
And the other aspect was that we reduced the day length slightly so to be more compatible with the observational data. So the sort of normal values of sunrise and sunset are set at when half the sun's disk is above the horizon, whereas the sun strength is not strong enough then to activate the instruments that measure sunshine. So the sunrise and sunset times are a little later and earlier, or earlier and I forget the way around it is now, but they're about an hour later for sunrise and about an hour earlier for sunset. So you have a slightly shorter day length in the new in the second version.
Yes.
And the other point to make is that the radiation data are just derived directly from the sunshine values using a formula developed by Munir, which you can see reference to in the Weather Generator report that was issued in 2009.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Phil. Those two questions are submitted by Hoodoo, which I see is online. Hoodoo, have you got any follow-up questions to that? I'll unmute you quickly so that I'll unmute you and just check. Hoodoo, do you have a speaker? Can you speak to us? Okay. No, thanks. Excellent. Right, so the next two questions were submitted by Emily Hay, who's not online, unfortunately, but some people may be interested in these questions. Roger may be able to answer the first question. Will the improved weather generator mean that tools like Prometheus, which is an ARCC project for modelling weather patterns for building performance, need to be updated and relaunched, bearing in mind they're being used right now in the real world by some practitioners, building refurbishment projects? And similar questions arise about Soundpipe, which is another ARCC project. Roger, are you able to offer any insight on that?
A little bit in terms of one of the things that's happening is that Prometheus is a research project, and as it says there, it's used some, it's modeled weather information. It's put out weather information that is used for analysis. Now, this is also being examined much more carefully by a number of other projects, and then all of that research projects, that information will be brought into SIPSI, which is the organization responsible for putting out the standards, and this will all be considered by that organization rather than individual projects. Prometheus is finished. I doubt it. I do not believe that it will redo its analysis and relaunch the information that it has. The primary information that is available there, as Colin said earlier, is probably not changed significantly because the information that it was dealing with is mostly isn't in the extremes that are being considered. So I do not believe it will be significant, the changes that have occurred. Now, with respect to downpipe, that is another project that is currently underway, and I would have to talk to downpipe to verify that what they are doing will use the new information, but I expect that they will.
Thanks, Roger. On to Emily's second question. How far does the latest weather generator successfully model weather in cities? Is there still more to do to model local urban heat island effects and patterns of weather in cities? Could one of the weather generator team answer that?
Okay, Anna. The weather generator is fit to observe data across the country. So these are station data that have been interpolated to 5-kilometre grids by the Met Office. So it's the 1961 to 90 base period that's used. And it basically depends on whether the city centre sites are within the observed database that went into the 5-kilometre grids. So in London, for example, we know that a site like St James's Park is in the analysis, but another site, say, that used to be at the London Weather Centre, which was operating in 61 to 90 before it closed down in the last couple of years, isn't. So some city centre sites were taken out of the analysis by the Met Office in producing the grids that we use as the data for the 1961 to 90 period. So heat island effects may not be there for some cities if there is not a city centre site within the area that the city resides.
Okay.
Just to add to that, they do use an urban algorithm which corrects some of the missing observation sites. How accurate that is, I couldn't say.
Anna?
The next question, is there summary data on what kinds of weather can be expected in some parts of the country that is accessible to non-specialists, like local spatial planners thinking about the future? Is this being promoted by the UKCP website? So, for instance, people have ideas about increased frequency of drought periods and long, hot, sunny periods. Roger, I see you've got your hand up anyway, so would you like to answer this question as well as what else you wanted to say?
I was going to start by adding a little bit to the previous question, is that answer to the previous question, and that is that, as some of you may be aware of, is there's a number of modeling efforts that are underway to look at the urban heat island in some of the major centres, and this includes Scorchio, which looked at Manchester and Sheffield, which I know have been using some of the inputs from the weather generator. And it also has included Lucid, which is looking at London, and it also includes Crew, which is looking at community resilience to extreme weather. And I thought so. There's a number of these activities underway. A number of which are using the weather generator as a way of looking at some of the structure and nature of the urban heat island. So I think it's important to recognize that difference. Now,
can I add something
there?
Go
ahead.
Roger, because it also relates to the question that Anna's moved on to. You've got to bear in mind that the weather generator is not producing weather as you would perceive it on sort of the weather forecast every evening. So when you generate a series of weather for 1 5-kilometre square, that's going to be unrelated to the next square. So there's not going to be a time, you're not going to be, they will be uncorrelated with the weather within 1 5 kilometre square compared to the next 5 kilometre square. So when you do that comparison between a square in the centre of a city and a square in the rural surroundings, you've got to look at statistics like the averages and not compare the individual daily values, because they'll be unrelated. So the point is that you're not producing, you've got to define what you mean by weather in a bit more detail. So we're not producing weather patterns, pressure patterns, etc., circulation patterns. We're producing time series individual grid boxes, or if you aggregate to the larger areas, so that they'll be unrelated to the next square or the next larger area that you might be using.
I think that's critical, and I'm glad you said that, Phil. Is that it's you know, a lot of these questions are focusing on weather and weather patterns, and that's not necessarily.
I think Chris might want to answer the point next about the drought periods in terms of the rainfall side, because there are some issues with using the weather generator for long period droughts, because we're just perturbing statistics on rainfall amounts and the wet and dry spells. We're not looking at wet and dry days. We're not looking at longer spells. And there's a certain belief within our group that the climate models may not be doing quite so well at reproducing long period statistics that you might relate to, for example, blocking, which then lead to droughts and or long hot sunny periods.
I could say a few words to that if it's helpful. Phil's pointed out that the climate models themselves are not capable of reproducing the multi-season interannual type of drought well. And in fact, nor is the rainfall model used in the weather generator ideally set up for reproducing these either. So, for example, the rainfall model doesn't use any statistics of duration greater than a year, or even greater than a month, for the autocorrelation or the persistence of drought directly. So, on the other hand, we can generate, and we do generate, long series of daily rainfall and analyse these on a monthly and annual basis. And the rainfall model does produce reasonable reproduction of what's observed. So there is some useful information and signal there, and the straight answer to this question is you can get information on frequency or change frequency of drought periods. What it's not doing is giving you the whole picture, and it's particularly not picking up on this interannual variability. What it is building in is the increased dry spells that you get through the summer, particularly due to the mean rainfall decreasing and due to the number of dry days increasing. So it's not doing a perfect job, but there is some useful information there. But the only way, I think what the question is after is, the only way that the user can get at that sort of thing via the UKCP website is by running the weather generator, which may be more than a number of users, non-specialists, would like to do.
There are a few people who have run heat wave events through the threshold detector. There are a few of those available in the case studies, with looking at heat waves in the 2080s and things like that and how they might change. So if you were looking for a kind of simple indication of how extreme events in a sense might change. There are a few examples of those around within the UKCP09 case studies. Does anybody else want to add anything to that question before I move on? All right. Michael, thank you for your question. I'll come to it as soon as you've answered the next one, because it's the last of the pre-prepared questions. Roger, you had some thoughts on this. Are there any implications for the climate change risk assessment from the new weather generator? Has any work been done on rainfall events in the climate change risk assessment?
There is some work being done on rainfall events, but I'm not convinced that, and I have not seen where this will, the addition of the weather generator this time will significantly affect a lot of the risks identified and the analysis that will be subsequently done. However, one of the things that we have done is we've looked at some of the implications and of changes to the weather generator and its outputs, and my early recollection is that my early analysis is I don't think it's going to change significantly anything that's in the CPRA assessment at this time.
Roger, we can't hear you very well. Your speaker's very muffly. If you can bring it closer to you or get papers from around it out the way, that would be much better.
Is this better?
Yeah. That sounds better.
Okay. Did what I said come through?
Most of it, I think, yes.
Yeah, the other point is that I've had an initial discussion with some of the people involved in doing the assessment under the CPRA, particularly those that are just looking at the climate component, and there is no strong feeling that there's going to be a change.
Thanks, Roger. Going to Michael's question, has there been any assessment of the changes in the calculation of PET, potential evapotranspiration? Does one of the weather generator team want to address that?
Okay. I mean, there's been no change to the calculation method, so but as there's been some changes to sunshine and vapor pressure, and to a limited extent to the temperatures, there will be some differences in the PET, but I think they will be pretty minor.
Great, thank you. Now, if anybody else would like to ask a question, if you raise your hand by clicking on the hand button under Make Presenter, we'll come to you. Otherwise, you can type in a question in the box at the bottom. Are there any other questions? Doesn't seem to be. We'll give you a few minutes in case you're typing in something. Right, there don't seem to be any other questions, so all that's left is to say thank you very much for joining us. We'll stay online for a few more minutes, just in case there are any questions you want to put to us. But thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful. And hopefully this presentation will be on our training site, if we can work out where the recording went to at the end of it. So thanks very much for joining us. And thanks very much to the weather generator team as well for being on hand to answer questions. And that's it. That's it from me and from Sophie.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.